Have you ever been stumped when someone has started a conversation with, "So tell me about yourself"? Questions like this may come up in your college interview, and here today we have my friend and colleague, Laura Stratton, the Director of Admission at Scripps College, to help you get prepared for your college interview. Laura, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Of course. So happy to be here, Andy, talking to you about this.
Wonderful. Thank you. So let's dive right into some questions um, that we get from our students and that people are thinking about in general as they prepare for their admission process. Tell us about why interviews are part of the admission process at Scripps, and to the extent you're able, does this reasoning apply to other colleges and universities who also offer interviews?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question and probably has the most annoying answer ever for students and families, which is it depends. I can share how we use interviews and how some of I know my colleagues use them. And most importantly, the interview is just an opportunity for students to take sort of what we're learning about them in the application and make it more real, right? So it's this opportunity to take the academic experiences that you've had or the clubs and organizations you're involved in and to expand on them. And for us to do our job as admission people, which is to see, is there alignment between what the student is looking for in a school and what we can offer them? And so it's just that opportunity, again, to be more real, to move beyond words on a page to being a real person.
Sure.
And I will say, it's also an opportunity for you students to get to know us better, right? And so I know we're going to talk a little bit about some ways that you can prepare, but it should not just be a one-way street where the student is doing all of the output, but instead the student should also be thinking of questions to ask, things that they need clarification on, and the person who's interviewing should be able to provide that.
That is super helpful and great advice, Laura. Along those lines, what are some pro tips for successful student interviews in terms of preparations? How should students approach this, and what should they not do? What can they avoid?
We were having a conversation about this in our office the other day, and someone said, well, how do students not know, when they should interview? And I had to remind them because every college does it a little bit different. So to acknowledge students and families who are setting up these interviews for their students, often some colleges want you to interview only once you've applied or once you've been invited. But that, I think, gets to my first piece of advice, which is have obviously whatever Google spreadsheet or however you're organizing deadlines and information about the particular colleges to which you're applying, add in there some type of a little something about interviews. Are they used? Are they required? Are they informational only? And that, I think, can really help to see, is this a school where I should interview? A few other ideas to keep in mind. I think it's great to do an interview first out of the gate at a school that you're excited about and interested in, but maybe isn't your tip-top choice, right? It's sort of that warm-up interview, just to see the types of questions that people have, to see the rhythm and flow of the conversation. And then move on to the ones at those schools that you're really interested in. We will not know if we're your first interview or your fifth interview.
Right.
So just feel free to set them up maybe strategically in terms of timing. And then the last thing is in terms of preparation. The first question you're probably going to be asked is, why are you interested in our college? Right. And that's one that a student can prepare for. I think it's good to make it obviously academic, but also personal, and why that particular school has caught your eye. And so if a student is looking for a good place to start, I think a school's mission statement and sort of the things that they're highlighting either on their social media accounts or on their website is a great place to start in preparing to answer that question.
That's really helpful. Have you, are there any examples or anything in your experience where it's been just a total miss, where something has gone wrong, a student is prepared the wrong way or approached this not so well?
Well, first, just for students and families to know, we are wanting to give students grace in the interview process.
Right.
We do not expect students to come in and to interview like they are on a job interview with 15 years of professional experience. We understand that a student is going to come into that interview being a high school student, and we want to know them as a high school student.
Mhm.
So it may seem a bit counterintuitive, but you should show up as yourself, but
Mhm.
like the version of yourself where you've taken a shower, right? And you put on a nicer shirt and you're ready for the conversation. You've had a cup of coffee, or you're ready.
Right.
But that being ready doesn't mean being a 40-year-old. And
Something. Yeah.
so to be yourself. The places where I feel like maybe they're amiss is just that the student really hasn't done any research on the school, and at the same time has not done any soul searching of what they want in a college.
Mhm.
Right. So one of my favorite questions to ask is, what have you not been able to do yet in high school
Mhm.
that you're really excited about doing in college?
Mhm.
Because that shows sort of a student's aspirations and where their interests are. And often students will say, I have absolutely no idea. And that's okay, because usually then a student will actually walk us through their thought process and get us there with them.
Sure.
See it as a conversation.
Yeah.
Do a little bit of self-reflection before you walk in the door.
That's super helpful and really great advice. Thank you, Laura. Last question. Can you speak to the weight the interview holds in the overall admission process at Scripps, the reasoning behind that? And then again, based on your knowledge, is that applicable to all schools who offer interviews, or do you guys do it a little bit differently?
So that's where a student and family can ask questions, right? Is the interview informational, right? That's just an exchange of information.
Yeah.
Is the interview evaluative? So
Yeah.
evaluative would mean that it's going into the student's application materials,
Mhm.
and it will then be used as part of the admission decision. So that's a great question that the students and families can ask. It What I found is usually the interview confirms everything else we've seen in the application.
Mhm.
Right. And so I think that gives students the permission to be themselves. But often when we're sitting in admission committee and we're talking about different students and deciding if a student is aligned well with Scripps mission, um, an admission officer will pop in and say, oh, I remember meeting that student. And we had this wonderful conversation where it veered in all of these different directions that really highlighted that alignment between our mission and what the student wants. And so it's almost always a benefit to the student to interview. And again, we're looking for a reason to advantage that student. I think that is most colleges, not all colleges though, right? And so I would imagine that the more selective a school becomes, the more that evaluative piece is important. And so just for students to be realistic about, I know as you talked to them about, setting an appropriate list of schools.
Right.
And also for the student to vibe check during the interview. And if a student leaves an interview and it didn't feel good at all,
Mhm.
that's the moment where they should come back to their trusted adults,
Mhm.
you as their counselors, their parents, their counselors at school,
Yeah.
and say, hey, this didn't go well. Is this an issue with the school? Or maybe should I give it another shot
Yeah.
and do some research in another way? It's all those little pieces of data that students can also have if a school is a good fit.
That's so great. I'm glad you brought that up. When years ago, when I was in admission and working with our interview program, we involved a lot of alumni and faculty, and by and large, they were great. But when you had somebody who wasn't, and they kind of gave that wrong vibe check, that's not the impression we perhaps intended to make, but the student might have left with that. So check the vibes as you mentioned, but then also double check to see get more context from your
Right.
trust. Well, I love that. I love that. Laura, thank you so much. This has been immensely helpful. It's great to see you.
Okay.
And we will be in touch. Thank you so much.
Sounds wonderful. Best of luck to everyone as you go about your interviews.
Thank you, Laura.